Welcome! My name is Maya, and this is the Speaking Momentum, the place where real English fluency is built, not just studied. Today, we are going to talk about something that most English teachers will never tell you. Something that language schools won't put in their curriculum. Something that is hiding in plain sight, backed by decades of neuroscience, sleep research, and language acquisition studies, and yet almost no learner is using it. We are going to talk about how your brain learns English while you sleep. Now, before you think this is some kind of magic trick or shortcut that promises results overnight without any real work, I want to be clear with you. This is not that. This is not a gimmick. This is not some sales pitch trying to get you to buy a 30-day program. What this is a deep and honest conversation about how language actually enters the human brain, how fluency is actually built, and why the method most people are using, the method of studying grammar rules, memorizing vocabulary lists, and taking tests, is not just inefficient, it is actually working against the very process your brain uses to become fluent. What you are going to learn today is a real, complete, and scientifically grounded system. It has two parts: the waking part, what you do during your day, and the sleeping part, what happens in your brain every night while you are unconscious. Both parts are essential. And when you combine them correctly, something extraordinary begins to happen. Language stops being something you study. It starts being something you feel, something that lives inside your body, not just inside your notebook. I have worked with English learners from dozens of countries. Learners who spent years studying grammar and still could not hold a simple conversation. Learners who passed Cambridge exams but froze the moment a native speaker spoke too fast. Learners who understood everything they read but could not get words out of their mouths under pressure. And I have watched those same learners transform, not because they found a smarter textbook, but because they finally understood how fluency actually works. Once they understood the process, everything changed. So settle in, get comfortable. This is going to be a long, deep, and genuinely useful session. By the time we are done, you will not just know what the method is, you will understand why it works, how to use it, and exactly what to do starting today. Let us begin. 1. The big lie about language learning. Let me start by telling you something that might be uncomfortable to hear. Most of what you have been taught about learning English is wrong. Not wrong in the sense that the information is false. The grammar rules you studied are real. The vocabulary lists you memorized were real words. The exercises you completed taught you something, but they were wrong in a deeper sense. They were based on a flawed model of how the human brain actually acquires language. Here is the model most schools use. You study a rule, you practice the rule, you memorize words, you do exercises using those words, you take a test, you pass the test, you have learned English. But here's what actually happens when you try to speak. The moment you open your mouth in a real conversation, all of those rules and all of those words disappear. Your brain freezes. You start translating in your head. You try to remember the right tense, the right preposition, the right word order. And while you are doing all of that mental calculation, the conversation moves forward without you. Sound familiar? This is not a personal failure. This is not a sign that you are not intelligent or that you do not work hard enough. This is the predictable result of using the wrong learning model. The wrong model treats English like mathematics. It says, learn the formula, apply the formula, get the right answer. But language is not mathematics. Language is a living, breathing, automatic process. When you speak your native language, you are not consciously applying rules. You are not calculating grammar in real time. You are simply thinking, and the words come. That automatic, effortless quality is what we call fluency. And you cannot build fluency by studying rules, no matter how many rules you study or how many years you spend studying them. So where does fluency actually come from? It comes from something called implicit knowledge. Knowledge that is stored not in your conscious thinking brain, but in a deeper layer. A layer that operates below the surface of conscious thought. This is the same layer that knows how to balance on a bicycle without consciously calculating the physics of balance. It is the same layer that allows a professional musician to play a complex piece while having a conversation with someone else. It is automatic. It is stored in the body as much as in the mind. When you study grammar rules, you are building something called explicit knowledge, conscious knowledge, the kind of knowledge you can describe and explain. And explicit knowledge has its place. It can help you understand why something sounds right or wrong. But explicit knowledge cannot be accessed at the speed of normal conversation. It is too slow. It requires conscious processing. And the moment you try to use it while speaking, your fluency collapses. The journey from explicit knowledge to implicit knowledge, from understanding English to speaking English automatically, is the real journey of language acquisition. And that journey happens in a very specific place. It happens in your sleep. 2. What science tells us about sleep and language. To understand why sleep is so important for language learning, we need to spend a few minutes talking about what actually happens inside your brain while you sleep. And I promise you, this is fascinating. Most people think of sleep as rest, the body and brain switching off, a pause in the day's activities. But that is not what sleep is at all. Sleep is one of the most neurologically active and complex things your brain does. Your brain during deep sleep is not silent, it is working. It is sorting, organizing, compressing, connecting, and consolidating everything it experienced during the day. Let me explain how this works. During your waking hours, your brain is constantly bombarded with information. Every conversation you hear, every word you read, every piece of language you encounter, all of it is taken in and temporarily held in a structure of the brain called the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as your brain's short-term holding area. It collects experiences and holds them, waiting for processing. But the hippocampus is small. It cannot hold everything forever. And raw experience is not the same as deep learning. For experience to become real, lasting knowledge, the kind of knowledge that can be accessed automatically and effortlessly, it needs to be transferred. It needs to be moved from the hippocampus into the neocortex, the vast outer layer of your brain where long-term memories and skills are stored. And here is the critical part: that transfer happens during sleep. Researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, and dozens of other institutions around the world have spent decades studying this process. And what they have found is remarkable. During the stages of sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, your brain replays the experiences of the day. It runs through the patterns it encountered. It strengthens the neural connections associated with those patterns. And it gradually moves information from short-term, effortful memory into long-term, automatic storage. This process is called memory consolidation, and it is absolutely essential for any kind of skill learning, including language. There is a study that I find especially powerful for understanding this. Researchers took two groups of people learning a new language skill. Both groups practiced the skill equally during the day. Then one group slept normally. The other group was kept awake and then tested. The group that slept showed dramatically better retention and automaticity, not just more memory, but faster and more automatic access to the skill. Sleep did not just preserve what they had learned, it organized it, deepened it, made it more fluid, turned conscious effort into something closer to instinct. And this is exactly what you need in order to speak English fluently. When you speak your native language, you are drawing on thousands and thousands of hours of consolidated language experience, patterns that have been processed during sleep over and over for years. Those patterns are not stored consciously. They are stored automatically at a neurological level so deep that retrieving them requires no effort at all. To speak English with that same quality of fluency, you need those same deeply consolidated patterns. You need your brain to have processed English, not just studied it, to the point where it lives below the level of conscious thought. And the most powerful way to support that process is not to study harder during the day. It is to understand what your brain needs to do during the night and give it the right material to work with. Now, I want to go one step further because there is another piece of the sleep science that most people do not know about, and it changes everything about how you should approach your English learning. During REM sleep, the stage characterized by rapid eye movement, vivid dreams, and intense neural activity, something very specific happens with language. Your brain during REM sleep shows activation patterns in language areas that are similar to waking language use. Researchers studying people who are bilingual or in the process of acquiring a second language have found that during REM sleep, the brain appears to be integrating new language patterns with existing ones. It is not just storing words. It is weaving them into the broader fabric of your existing language knowledge. This means your brain, during sleep, is actively building the connections between your native language and English. It is comparing structures. It is finding patterns. It is creating the neural infrastructure that will eventually allow you to think in English rather than translate from your native language. The implications of this are enormous. It means that what you expose yourself to during your waking hours, and especially in the hours just before sleep, has a profound impact on what your brain processes during the night. Your brain consolidates what it was recently exposed to. So if the last thing you did before sleep was scroll through social media in your native language, that is what gets extra processing. But if you saturated your waking hours with rich, meaningful, emotionally engaging English, and especially if you spent the final hour before sleep in deep contact with English, your brain will take that material and work on it through the night. This is the foundation of the method we are going to build together. Not magic, not a shortcut, but a deliberately designed system that works with the natural rhythms of your brain, using the hours of sleep as a powerful amplifier of everything you do while you are awake. 3. Why most learners never reach fluency. Before we get into the method itself, I want to make sure we understand exactly why the traditional approach fails. Because if you understand the failure clearly, you will understand the solution instinctively. The traditional approach to learning English has 3 fundamental problems. I call them the 3 walls. Every learner I have ever worked with has hit at least one of these walls. Most have hit all 3. The first wall is the translation wall. Most adult learners of English, regardless of their native language, develop a habit early in their learning that feels helpful but is actually deeply limiting. That habit is mental translation. When you hear English, you translate it into your native language to understand it. When you want to speak English, you formulate your thought in your native language and then translate it into English. This works when you are a beginner. In fact, it is the only way to get started. But here is the problem. Translation is slow, agonizingly slow compared to the speed of natural conversation. And the more you rely on it, the more deeply embedded that habit becomes. Eventually, translation becomes your default mode, and it keeps you locked out of real fluency. Real fluency means thinking in English, not translating into English. Thinking in it. When a native English speaker is happy, they do not think the concept of happiness in some language-free mental space and then translate it into the word happy. The word happy and the feeling of happiness are directly connected with no translation step in between. The word is the thought is the word. You need to build that same direct connection between English words and meaning, between English structures and thought, and the translation habit actively prevents that from happening. Every time you translate, you are reinforcing a pathway that goes thought, native language, English. And what you need to build is a direct pathway, thought, English. The translation wall is one of the most important things to break through on the journey to fluency. And we will talk specifically about how to do it. The second wall is the anxiety wall. Speaking a second language makes you vulnerable in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable. You cannot express yourself as fully or as precisely as you can in your native language. You make mistakes, you pause, you search for words. People sometimes misunderstand you, and this one stings. Finish your sentences for you. All of this creates anxiety, and anxiety creates a physiological response in your body that directly interferes with language production. When you are anxious, your brain activates a threat response. Resources are redirected away from higher cognitive functions, including language production, and towards survival responses. Your mouth goes dry, your mind goes blank. The words you knew just a moment ago suddenly disappear. Every learner knows this feeling. You study at home and everything makes sense. You feel prepared. Then you are in a real situation, a job interview, a meeting, a conversation with a native speaker, and it all evaporates. This is not weakness, this is neurobiology, and the solution is not to try harder or to practice more grammar exercises. The solution is to restructure your relationship with English itself at an emotional and neurological level. The third wall is the exposure wall. Language is not learned through study. Language is acquired through exposure. This is one of the most well-established findings in linguistics and language acquisition research. You cannot learn to speak English by studying about English. You learn to speak English by being surrounded by English, hearing it, using it, living inside it. The problem is that most learners, especially those not living in an English-speaking country, have very limited real exposure to English. They study English for 1 or 2 hours a day and then return to their native language. They live in their native language, watch television in their native language, think in their native language. Your brain adapts to what it is most frequently exposed to. If it is mostly exposed to your native language, it will remain optimized for your native language. The neural patterns for English will remain thin, fragile, and easily disrupted by stress. To achieve real fluency, you need to dramatically increase your exposure to English. Not just study time, exposure time, time spent inside the language, hearing it, feeling it, living with it. And this is one of the things the sleep method addresses in a powerful way because it extends your effective exposure to English into the hours when you are asleep. Now, with these 3 walls clearly in mind, let us talk about the method. For the 2-phase system, an overview. The system I am going to teach you has 2 phases. They work together and you cannot have one without the other. Phase 1 is the waking phase. This is what you do during your day to give your brain the right material, the right language input, the right emotional connections, the right patterns of exposure. The quality of your waking phase directly determines the quality of what your brain processes during the night. Phase 2 is the sleep phase. This is what happens in your brain after you have completed the waking phase correctly, and what you do in those final hours before sleep to prepare your brain for its nightly language work. Most people focus entirely on the waking phase and ignore the sleep phase completely. They study hard during the day and then switch off. Their brain has to do its nightly consolidation work with whatever material happens to be in their head at the end of the day. Often a mixture of work stress, social media, entertainment in their native language, and perhaps some English study. The method I am going to teach you is about deliberately designing both phases, about understanding that your learning day does not end when you close your textbook. It ends when you fall asleep. And more than that, your most powerful learning happens after you fall asleep. Let me walk you through each phase in detail. Phase 1, the waking protocol. The waking protocol is built around 4 pillars. Each one addresses one of the fundamental requirements for deep language acquisition. Together, they create the daily language environment that your brain needs to begin the process of building real fluency. Pillar 1, massive comprehensible input. The phrase comprehensible input comes from the linguist Stephen Krashen, whose work on language acquisition has influenced every serious researcher in the field. The idea is elegant and powerful. You acquire language as opposed to just learning about language when you understand messages in that language, not when you study it, but when you understand it. And the more of it you understand, the faster acquisition happens. The critical word here is comprehensible. Input that is too difficult, where you understand almost nothing, does not lead to acquisition. It leads to frustration. But input that is slightly above your current level, where you understand most of it, but there are elements you have to stretch for, that is the sweet spot. Krashen called this input plus 1, your current level plus 1 step ahead. This means your primary language activity each day should not be grammar exercises or vocabulary lists. It should be consuming real, meaningful English content that you mostly understand. Podcasts, audiobooks, movies, television series, news broadcasts, conversations, anything that is in English that you find genuinely interesting and that you can follow with reasonable comprehension. The word interesting is important because language acquisition is not a purely cognitive process. It is an emotional one. When you are genuinely interested in what you are listening to or watching, your brain releases neurotransmitters, including dopamine, that dramatically enhance the encoding of information. Content you find boring passes through your brain without leaving much trace. Content that genuinely engages you, that makes you feel something, that holds your attention, that you actually want to continue, gets encoded at a much deeper level. So the first practical step of the waking protocol is this. Choose your English content based on genuine interest. What are you actually curious about? What subjects do you genuinely enjoy? Science, history, true crime, comedy, business, sports, drama, whatever it is, find English language content about that subject and consume as much of it as you reasonably can every day. I recommend a minimum of 2 hours of comprehensible input daily. For fastest progress, 4 to 5 hours. This sounds like a lot, but remember, this is not study time in the traditional sense. This is time you can spend while doing other things. Listening to a podcast while cooking, watching a series while eating, listening to an audiobook while commuting. The goal is to immerse yourself in English as a natural part of your day, not to sit at a desk staring at a textbook. Pillar 2, emotional anchoring. This pillar is perhaps the most underrated of all, and yet it is one of the most powerful things you can do to accelerate your progress. The human brain does not store memories and experiences neutrally. It stores them with emotional weight, experiences that carry strong emotions. Joy, fear, laughter, surprise, sadness, excitement are encoded more deeply, recalled more easily, and retained for longer. This is not a learning theory, this is basic neuroscience. The amygdala, the part of the brain that processes emotion, is directly connected to the hippocampus. Emotional experiences get fast-tracked into long-term memory. This means that how you feel when you encounter English matters enormously. If every English experience you have is associated with the anxiety of a test, the boredom of a grammar exercise, or the embarrassment of making mistakes in front of a class, then English itself becomes associated with those negative emotions. And your brain learns to avoid things associated with negative emotions, just as it learns to seek things associated with positive ones. You need to build a different emotional relationship with English. A relationship associated with joy, discovery, connection, curiosity, and pleasure. Here's how to do that in practice. Start each English learning session, even if it is just 5 minutes, with something that genuinely makes you happy in English. A funny clip, a piece of music you love, a short video of something you find beautiful. Anchor your daily English time to positive feeling. Laugh in English, watch comedy, follow English language accounts that make you smile, listen to English music that moves you, watch films that excite you. The more positive emotional experiences you accumulate in English, the more your brain will begin to associate the language itself with pleasure. And when your brain associates English with pleasure, it stops resisting it. The anxiety wall begins to dissolve. The language starts to feel like a friend, not a test. Pillar 3, speaking without fear. This is the pillar that most people are most afraid of, and therefore the one most people avoid. But avoiding speaking in English is one of the single most powerful ways to stay stuck. Here is the thing about speaking anxiety. The anxiety is not about your English ability. The anxiety is about being judged, about being seen to make mistakes, about not meeting an imagined standard of good English. And that imagined standard is almost always much higher than what is actually required for effective communication. I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to mentally let go of the idea that your English must be perfect before you speak it. Perfect English is not the goal. Communicating in English is the goal. And you can communicate long before your English is perfect. Native English speakers make grammatical errors in conversation constantly. They use incomplete sentences, informal structures, invented words, misused phrases, and yet they communicate perfectly well. Because communication is not about grammatical correctness. It is about expression, connection, and understanding. Your English does not need to be perfect, it needs to be real. The practical application of this pillar is simple but requires commitment. Every day, speak English to yourself, out loud, to your phone, to a conversation partner, in a language exchange, in an online community, in front of a mirror. It does not matter who you are speaking to. The key is that you are producing English out of your own mouth every single day. When you speak English regularly, even alone, even imperfectly, even in short bursts, you are doing two critical things. First, you are practicing the physical act of producing English sounds and rhythms, which is a motor skill that improves with repetition just like any other motor skill. Second, you are building the neural habit of reaching for English rather than translating. You are teaching your brain that English production is a normal, low-threat activity. Start with narration. Narrate your own day to yourself in English. Getting up in the morning? Describe what you are doing. Cooking? Comment on it in English. Driving? Talk about what you see. This is not as strange as it sounds. It is actually one of the most effective fluency building practices that exists, and it costs nothing and requires no partner. Pillar 4. Conscious pattern recognition. This pillar is the only one that involves anything resembling traditional study, but it is a very different kind of study than most learners are used to. Instead of studying grammar rules, I want you to study patterns. Specifically, I want you to notice how English works when you encounter it naturally, and to collect examples of language patterns that you find interesting, useful, or that you want to make your own. Language is patterns. Fluent speakers do not retrieve individual words and then arrange them according to grammar rules. They retrieve whole patterns, chunks of language that they have heard and used so many times that they exist as single units in memory. Phrases like "it goes without saying," "on the other hand," "I was wondering if," "the thing is," that being said, these are not assembled word by word. They are retrieved as complete units. To build fluency, you need to build a library of these chunks. And the best way to do that is not to memorize lists of them, but to encounter them naturally, notice them, write them down, and then use them deliberately in your speaking and writing until they become automatic. Every day, as part of your comprehensible input, actively notice language patterns that you find interesting. Short phrases, expressions, conversational structures, ways of beginning or ending sentences. Write them down, say them out loud, use them in your daily narration practice. Over time, your brain will absorb these patterns and they will become part of your automatic language repertoire. This is slow at first. One pattern a day adds up to 30 patterns a month, 365 patterns in a year, and once a pattern is truly automatic, truly part of your implicit knowledge, it is yours forever. It will come out of your mouth without effort in exactly the right moment because your brain has stored it at the right level of depth. These 4 pillars, massive comprehensible input, emotional anchoring, speaking without fear, and conscious pattern recognition, form the foundation of your daily waking practice. Together, they give your brain the rich, emotionally resonant, pattern-rich language experience that it needs to do its nightly consolidation work. Now let us talk about how to prepare your brain for that nightly work. 6, the transition window, the hour before sleep. Here is something that most people do not think about when they think about their sleep. The hour before you fall asleep is the most powerful hour in your entire language learning day. Not because of what you study during that hour, because of what your brain does with it during the night. Sleep researchers call it the pre-sleep window. And the evidence shows consistently that material encountered in the last 60 to 90 minutes before sleep is disproportionately processed and consolidated during the night. Your brain essentially flags this material as recent and important and gives it priority during the consolidation process. Think about what most people do in the hour before sleep. They scroll through social media, they watch television, often in their native language, they check messages, they have conversations, they worry about tomorrow. All of this is noise. All of this is what gets flagged by the brain as recent and important. And so during the night, the brain processes all of that noise. What if instead you spent that hour completely inside English, not studying English, not doing grammar exercises, but immersing yourself in rich, meaningful, emotionally engaging English content and doing it in a way that is calm, enjoyable, and deeply absorbing? Here is a 3-part pre-sleep English ritual that I recommend to every learner I work with. The first part lasts about 20 minutes. I call it the review and reconnect. Take the patterns, phrases, and expressions you collected during the day, the language you noticed, the chunks you wanted to learn, and read through them. Not to test yourself, not to memorize, just to reconnect with them. Read them slowly, say them out loud softly, let them move through your mind gently. This tells your brain, this material is important, please work on this tonight. The second part lasts about 25 minutes. I call it the story bath. This is the heart of the pre-sleep ritual. Lie down comfortably or sit in your most comfortable position and listen to English being spoken. Specifically, I recommend listening to a story, a narrative, something with characters, emotion, and human experience, an audiobook, a podcast with storytelling, a documentary narration, a memoir, anything that is telling you a story in English. Why a story? Because narrative is the most deeply human form of language. Our brains evolved to process and remember stories. Stories engage the emotional centers of the brain, the imaginative centers, the social centers. A story listened to with full relaxation in the final period before sleep is processed at an exceptionally deep level. The patterns in the story, the grammar, the vocabulary, the rhythm, the structures are absorbed not just intellectually but emotionally and physically. And here is a crucial detail. You should not be trying to study during the story bath. You should not be trying to understand every word or remember every phrase. You should simply be listening, relaxed, letting the English wash over you and through you. Let your attention drift. Let the sounds of the language settle into you. There is a state between full attention and sleep, a deeply relaxed, almost dreamy state. And in that state, the language enters very deeply. Let yourself be in that state. The third part lasts about 15 minutes. I call it the intention setting. This sounds unusual, but stay with me. Before you fall asleep, I want you to do something very simple. In your mind, or quietly out loud if you prefer, speak to yourself in English. Describe your day. Mention something interesting you heard or learned. Express something you felt. Use the phrases you collected. Speak slowly and gently, without pressure, without correction. Just talk to yourself in English as you drift towards sleep. This serves two purposes. First, it continues to flag English as the priority material for your brain to process during the night. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it builds the habit of English being the last active thought of your day. Your internal dialogue, the voice inside your head, is one of the most powerful indicators of what language your brain is most deeply organized around. And when you begin to move that internal dialogue into English, you are breaking through the translation wall at its deepest level. You are teaching your brain that English is not just something you study, English is something you think in. Do not rush this transition. It will not happen in one night or 1 week. But with daily practice, over weeks and months, you will begin to notice something remarkable happening. The internal voice, the one that narrates your experience to yourself, will start to use English phrases spontaneously. Words will arise in English without you searching for them. Thoughts will form in English before you have had a chance to translate. That is the feeling of the translation wall coming down. And it is one of the most exciting things that can happen in a language learner's life. 7. What to listen to while you sleep. Now we arrive at the most controversial and most fascinating part of the method. Listening to English while you sleep. I want to address the controversy directly. There is a version of sleep learning, subliminal audio, recordings played during deep sleep with the promise of waking up fluent, that does not work. The research on passive, unconscious language acquisition during deep sleep phases is not convincing. You cannot learn English by simply playing recordings while you are fast asleep and expecting your unconscious mind to absorb it independently of any waking effort. That version of sleep learning is a myth, and I am not going to tell you otherwise. But here is what does work, and this distinction is important. Playing familiar, well-understood English audio softly in the early stages of sleep, particularly during the light sleep and early REM stages, can meaningfully support the consolidation process that is already happening. You are not learning new material this way. You are reinforcing material that your brain is already working on. Think of it like this. During the night, your brain is running through the language it encountered during the day. It is replaying patterns, strengthening connections, organizing information. If you play softly in the background, the same content you were engaging with before sleep, the same stories, the same conversations, the same voices, you are giving your brain a reference signal. The brain recognizes this material. It has context for it. And the soft presence of that familiar audio at a very low volume can support and guide the consolidation process. This is not magic. It is alignment. You are aligning your sleeping brain's natural work with the material you most want it to work on. Here are the specific guidelines for how to do this well. Volume is critical. The audio should be at a volume where, if you were awake and calm, you could follow it without effort, but where you have to be listening to catch it. Very soft, not background noise, not so quiet it is inaudible, just present, just there. This is the optimal volume for sleep reinforcement, present enough to guide the brain's attention, quiet enough not to disrupt the sleep cycle. Content choice matters enormously. The audio you play during sleep should always be content you already understand well. Do not play advanced conversations or fast-paced English that you find difficult when awake. Your sleeping brain needs to recognize the patterns, not struggle with them. Choose content from your pre-sleep story bath or other content you have already listened to multiple times. Familiar voices, familiar stories, known patterns. Never play stimulating or stressful content during sleep. Anything with urgency, conflict, loud sounds, or rapid pace will interfere with your sleep rather than support it. Your sleep is not a study session, your sleep is a processing session. And the quality of your sleep matters far more than the quality of the audio. If the audio is disrupting your sleep, turn it off immediately. A full night of deep, uninterrupted sleep with no audio is dramatically better than a disrupted night with English playing. Always protect your sleep quality above everything else. The ideal content for sleep reinforcement is calm, narrative, clearly spoken English with a warm and pleasant voice, gentle storytelling, slow-paced conversations, reflective monologues, nature documentaries with contemplative narration, meditation-style spoken content in English. These are all excellent choices. I want to share something with you that I find deeply interesting. Several researchers studying bilingual learners found that those who had significant exposure to their second language during the relaxed pre-sleep and early sleep states showed faster development of automatic language processing than those who had equal waking exposure but no sleep phase reinforcement. The sleep phase group not only retained vocabulary better, they were faster and more fluid in accessing it during speaking tasks. This is the power of aligned sleep reinforcement. It is not a shortcut, but it is a multiplier. It takes the work you are already doing during the day and makes it go deeper, faster. Let me give you a typical evening setup. You have spent your day doing your comprehensible input, your daily narration, your pattern collecting. At 9 o'clock, you begin your pre-sleep ritual. You spend 20 minutes reviewing your collected patterns. You spend 25 minutes listening to an audiobook, something you genuinely enjoy, something with a warm narrative voice. You spend 15 minutes speaking gently to yourself in English as you prepare for sleep. Then you lie down, set your phone to very low volume, put on the same audiobook you were listening to earlier, and drift off to sleep. Your brain spends the next several hours doing what it does every night, consolidating, organizing, strengthening. But tonight, instead of consolidating the noise of social media and the anxiety of daily worries, it is consolidating English, patterns of English, rhythms of English, sounds and structures of English, woven into the fabric of your long-term memory. Every morning, you wake up with English a little more deeply embedded in you than it was the night before. Not dramatically. The change is subtle day by day, but over weeks and months, the accumulation is extraordinary. 8. The morning activation system. Sleep consolidation builds the foundation. The morning activation system is how you access what your brain built during the night and begin reinforcing it consciously. Most people treat morning as the beginning of their learning day. But if you have been using the method correctly, morning is actually the most important retrieval and reinforcement window of your day. Your brain has just spent hours working on English. The material is fresh, activated, and ready. And what you do in the first 30 minutes after waking determines how much of that nightly work gets locked in for the long term. The morning activation system has 3 elements. Each one takes about 10 minutes. Element 1, the English wake up. The moment you wake up, before reaching for your phone, before speaking to anyone, before your mind fills with the demands of the day, do one thing. Think in English, or try to. Gently, without pressure, let your first conscious thoughts be in English. This might feel almost impossible at first. Your brain is groggy, your native language is right there, comfortable and automatic. That is fine. Do not force it, but do give it space. Lie in bed for 5 minutes and gently try to describe in English how you feel, what you notice, what you are thinking about. Even one sentence is enough, even one phrase. What you are doing is testing the retrieval path, checking whether the English your brain worked on last night is accessible this morning. And almost always, it is more accessible than you expect. Words come a little more easily. Phrases arise that you did not consciously study. A structure you were struggling with yesterday feels slightly more natural today. This is the feeling of sleep consolidation at work. It is real, and acknowledging it, noticing it, and celebrating it tells your brain that this progress is important and worth continuing. Element 2, the morning replay. After your English wake up, take 10 minutes to listen to or read a short piece of English. Ideally, this should be the same content you listen to during your pre-sleep story bath. A section of the audiobook, a passage from a podcast, a few minutes of the same content. Why the same content? Because recognition is the first step to automaticity. When your brain encounters material it processed during sleep, it recognizes it at a deeper level than material encountered for the first time. The patterns feel more familiar, the words feel more available, and the act of consciously engaging with material your brain already worked on unconsciously deepens the consolidation dramatically. This is called spaced retrieval, and it is one of the most well-researched and powerful learning techniques in cognitive science. Encountering material again shortly after the first encounter, but after a period of sleep-based processing, massively increases long-term retention. The morning replay is your daily spaced retrieval session. You do not need to analyze the content or take notes, just listen or read with relaxed attention. Notice what feels familiar. Notice the moments where you anticipate a word or phrase before you hear it. Those moments are your brain showing you that the pattern is being stored at a deeper level. Element 3, the morning expression. The third element of the morning activation system is the most active. Take 10 minutes and speak English out loud about anything. Tell the story of a dream you had. Describe your plans for the day. Talk about something you heard in the content you listened to. Express an opinion about something. Tell yourself a story. It does not matter what you say. What matters is that you are using English for real expression at the beginning of your day. This does 3 things. It activates the motor circuits involved in English speech, warming them up for the day ahead. It tests and reinforces the material your brain worked on during the night. And it begins your day with the physical and psychological experience of speaking English confidently and freely. Over time, the morning expression practice becomes one of the most visible indicators of your progress, because what you say in those 10 minutes will slowly but surely change. Your sentences will grow longer, your vocabulary will expand, your grammar will become more natural. The pauses for searching will become shorter, the flow will increase, and one morning, and you will remember this morning, you will be speaking and realize that you have been going for several minutes without stopping, without searching, without translating, and you will know that something fundamental has shifted. The morning activation system, combined with the pre-sleep ritual and the full waking protocol, creates a complete learning cycle that uses every part of your day, including your sleeping hours, to build English fluency from the inside out. 9, breaking through the translation habit. We talked earlier about the translation wall, the deeply ingrained habit of thinking in your native language and translating into English. This habit is the single biggest barrier to true fluency for most adult learners. And I want to dedicate a full section to it, because breaking through this wall requires a specific, targeted approach. The translation habit was useful. Let me give it credit. When you were a beginning learner, it was the only tool you had. You did not have enough English to think in English, so you thought in what you knew and translated. Without that crutch, you could not have communicated at all in the early stages. But at some point, and that point comes earlier than most learners realize, the translation habit stops being a crutch and becomes a cage. It keeps you functioning, but it keeps you slow. It keeps you communicating, but it keeps you sounding mechanical. And it keeps the translation process so woven into your English use that removing it feels terrifying. The good news is that you do not need to remove it all at once. The translation habit dissolves gradually as you build the direct connections between English and meaning, and there are specific practices that accelerate that process. The first practice is what I call think first in English. This is deceptively simple. Whenever you are about to say something, in any context, not just in English, pause for half a second and try to think of how to say it in English first. Not translate it, think it. If English does not come, that is fine. You do not need to speak in English right now. But the attempt, the reaching for English first, is the practice. Do this with simple things. I need coffee. The traffic is terrible today. I wonder what the weather will be like. She seems stressed. These are simple thoughts, and you probably already know how to express all of them in English. The translation habit is not about English ability. It is about habit, and habits change through repetition. Every time you think something in English before you think it in your native language, you are reinforcing the direct pathway. You are making English the default rather than the translation. The second practice is what I call the language environment flip. Take one area of your life and make it English only. Just one, your phone's language settings, your music playlist, the podcasts you listen to while commuting, the internal monologue you use while exercising. Just one area, and commit to English only in that area. What happens when you do this is fascinating, because that area of your life becomes an English language zone. And as you inhabit that zone regularly, the brain begins to associate the activities in that zone with English directly without translation. You start reaching for English in that context automatically, and gradually that automatic quality spreads. Then you flip another area and another. Slowly, your life becomes more saturated with English as a natural environment, not as a studied subject, but as the language you use to do things. The third practice is the most advanced, and it requires some courage. I call it the English thinking meditation. Once a day, ideally in the morning or before sleep, sit quietly for 10 minutes and think only in English. Whatever comes to mind, whatever drifts through your consciousness, try to formulate it in English, not for anyone else, not for a test, just the experience of your own mind moving through the world in English. This is uncomfortable at first. Your native language will keep pushing back in. Do not fight it. Simply notice when a thought forms in your native language and gently try to rephrase it in English. There is no failure here. The practice is not about achieving perfect English thought. The practice is about spending time in the experience of trying to think in English, because every minute of that experience is building the neural infrastructure for it to become natural. Many learners who have done this practice consistently for 60 to 90 days report a remarkable experience, moments where they are not sure which language they are thinking in. The thought is just a thought, and they could express it in either language with equal ease. That is the feeling of true bilingual fluency beginning to emerge. Breaking the translation wall is not a single event, it is a gradual process. But with these practices applied consistently and patiently, it will happen. 10. The emotional architecture of fluency. I want to spend some time on something that rarely gets discussed in language learning programs, and yet in my experience is one of the most important factors in whether a learner succeeds or stays stuck. That something is the emotional architecture of your relationship with English. Every learner has an emotional relationship with English. It is almost always unconscious, but it is always there. And that emotional relationship either accelerates your progress or impedes it, far more than any grammar textbook or speaking exercise ever could. What do I mean by emotional architecture? I mean the feelings, memories, associations, and beliefs that live in your body and mind around the experience of speaking and using English. And for most adult learners, those feelings include a significant amount of pain. Pain from being corrected harshly in school, pain from the embarrassment of being misunderstood, pain from the feeling of inadequacy, of not being able to express yourself fully, of feeling less intelligent in English than in your native language, pain from rejection or mockery when you made a mistake, pain from years of being told that your English is not good enough. These emotional wounds do not just create anxiety, they create what psychologists call a conditioned threat response. Your brain has learned through repeated experience that English-speaking situations are potentially dangerous. And so the moment you are in an English-speaking situation, your brain activates defenses, your body tenses, your mind narrows, your language production system goes offline. The very thing you are trying to do becomes neurologically unavailable to you. This is why some learners can have a perfectly fluent English conversation with a close friend, but freeze completely in a professional setting. The language knowledge is the same. The emotional environment is different, and the emotional environment is what determines access to the language. Building healthy emotional architecture around English is therefore not just a nice addition to the language learning process, it is a fundamental requirement for fluency, and it requires deliberate attention. Here is a framework that I use with learners to rebuild their emotional relationship with English. The first step is what I call the compassionate witness. Whenever you feel anxiety or shame around your English, I want you to notice it without judging it. Say to yourself, in whatever language feels most natural in that moment, I notice I feel anxious about my English right now. That makes sense. English has sometimes been a painful experience. My brain is trying to protect me. Do not fight the anxiety. Do not push it away. Witness it with compassion. This breaks the loop of anxiety about anxiety, which is often more paralyzing than the original feeling. The second step is to deliberately create positive English experiences. Small, low-stakes, joy-filled English interactions. Watch a funny YouTube video in English and let yourself genuinely laugh. Listen to English music that gives you goosebumps. Read something in English that moves you. Have a casual exchange in English, online or in person, where you are just being friendly and human, with no pressure to be impressive. Every positive English experience is a tiny deposit in what I think of as your emotional bank account with the language. And over time, those deposits accumulate, the balance shifts. English begins to feel less like a threat and more like a pleasure. The third step is to change your definition of success. For most learners, success means I spoke without making a mistake. I want you to adopt a different definition. Success means I used English. That is it. The moment you open your mouth and English comes out, you have succeeded. Whether it is grammatically perfect or not, whether the person understood you perfectly or not, whether you spoke fluently or with pauses and corrections, you used English. That is success. That is the only metric that matters in the early stages of emotional rebuilding. When you adopt this definition, the anxiety diminishes rapidly. Because success is now always available, it requires nothing except the courage to try. And as you accumulate success, real, genuine daily success, your brain's emotional association with English begins to shift. It stops being a source of threat. It starts being a source of competence, pleasure, and identity. The fourth step is perhaps the most transformative. I want you to build an English identity. Your identity, your sense of who you are, is one of the most powerful drivers of behavior that exists. People act in ways that are consistent with who they believe themselves to be. If you believe that you are a person who struggles with English, you will continue to struggle with English. Not because you are not intelligent or capable, but because your behavior will consistently align with that identity. But if you begin to build the identity of a person who speaks English, not who is learning English, not who is trying to speak English, but who speaks English, everything changes. The way you engage with the language changes, the choices you make change. The persistence you bring to the practice changes. How do you build an English identity? Through exactly the kind of daily practice we have been talking about. Every morning you wake up and think in English, you are being a person who speaks English. Every evening you spend in the story bath, you are being a person who speaks English. Every time you narrate your day out loud in English, you are being a person who speaks English. Every positive emotional experience you create in English, every pattern you collect and use, every act of speaking without fear, all of it is evidence that you are building toward the person you are choosing to become. And eventually, and this is the magic, the evidence becomes the identity. You do not have to tell yourself, I am working toward being fluent in English. You just are. It is who you are. And who you are speaks English. 11, the 30-day speaking momentum plan. Now, I want to give you something concrete, a 30-day plan that takes everything we have discussed and turns it into daily action. This is not a rigid curriculum. It is a framework, a daily structure that you adapt to your own life, your own interests, and your own pace. The goal of the 30-day plan is not to make you fluent in 30 days. That is not a realistic promise, and I am not going to make it. The goal is to establish the habits, the systems, and the emotional patterns that will carry you all the way to fluency, however long that takes. The 30 days are about building the machine. Once the machine is running, it keeps running. Week 1, Foundation Week. The focus of the first week is establishing your daily English environment. You are not trying to do everything at once. You are building the container. Day 1 through 3, set up your comprehensible input. Choose your primary English content sources. What podcasts, audiobooks, or shows will you listen to and watch? Choose things you are genuinely interested in. Download them, make them easily accessible. Remove friction from accessing them. Day 4 through 6, establish your daily narration practice. Every day, for at least 10 minutes, narrate your life in English out loud. Just describe what you are doing, what you see, what you are thinking. Do not worry about accuracy. Just speak. Day 7, set up your pre-sleep ritual. Choose an audiobook or narrative podcast for your story bath. Tonight, try the full 3-part ritual for the first time. Review your patterns. Do your story bath. Set your sleep audio at very low volume. See how it feels. Week 2, depth week. The focus of the second week is going deeper into each element of the system. Days 8 through 10 focus on emotional anchoring. Every morning, start your English time with something that makes you happy in English, something genuinely joyful. Begin cataloging your emotional English experiences. Days 11 through 13, begin the English thinking meditation. 10 minutes a day, thinking in English. This will feel difficult. That is fine. The difficulty is the practice. Day 14, review the week. Notice what feels easier than it did 7 days ago. Write in English about how you feel about your progress. Week 3, integration week. The focus of the third week is integrating all the elements into a seamless daily experience. Days 15 through 17, begin flipping one area of your life to English only. Your phone settings, your music, your commute listening, just one area. Days 18 through 20, begin building conscious pattern recognition. Every day collects 3 to 5 language patterns from your comprehensible input. Write them down. Use them in your narration. Days 21, attempt your first English-only day. From waking to sleeping, try to use English as much as possible in your thoughts, your narrations, your media consumption. It will not be perfect. The imperfection is the point. Week 4, momentum week. The focus of the fourth week is consolidating the habits and beginning to feel the momentum. Days 22 through 25, focus on speaking longer. Instead of 10-minute narration sessions, try 20 or 30 minutes. Talk about complex topics, express opinions, tell stories from your life. Days 26 through 28, begin seeking English interaction outside yourself. Comment on English social media posts. Join an online English conversation community. Write a short message to someone in English. Find a language exchange partner. Days 29 through 30, reflect. Read your notes from the first day. Listen to a recording of yourself from day 1 if you made one. Notice the change, not just in your English, but in your relationship with it and how it feels to be inside the language. By the end of day 30, the practices should feel like habits. They should feel like a natural part of your day, not an extra effort added to it. And the language itself should feel different to you. Closer, more available, more like yours. What happens after 30 days? You keep going with more confidence, with a clearer sense of what works for you, with the growing certainty, not just hope, but evidence-based certainty that you are on a real path to real fluency. 12 common mistakes and how to avoid them. Before we close, I want to address the most common mistakes I see learners make when they start using this method. Because even with a clear system, there are traps that are easy to fall into. Mistake 1, confusing input with acquisition. Consuming comprehensible input is essential, but it is possible to consume enormous amounts of English content without acquiring much of it if you are consuming passively and emotionally disengaged. Putting English on in the background while you do other things does not count as comprehensible input. Truly engaged listening, where you are following the content, understanding it, feeling it, is what drives acquisition. The test is simple. Could you tell someone else what you just heard? If yes, you were genuinely engaged. If no, you were passive. Aim for engaged. Hours of passive exposure have only a fraction of the value of even 30 minutes of genuinely engaged input. Mistake 2, skipping the speaking practice. I understand why this happens. Speaking practice is uncomfortable. It requires courage. It feels vulnerable. And unlike listening to a podcast, it produces immediate visible evidence of your current limitations. But skipping the speaking practice is like trying to become a swimmer by reading about swimming. You can understand everything about swimming technique and still not be able to swim. Production, actual speaking, is not just a test of what you have learned, it is itself a learning process. The act of trying to produce English creates retrieval attempts that deepen memory, reveals gaps that direct your learning, and builds the motor habits that fluent speech requires. Do not skip the speaking, even if it is 5 minutes, even if it is imperfect, even if you are alone. Speak. Mistake 3, measuring progress too early and too often. Language acquisition is not linear. There are periods of apparent stagnation where nothing seems to be changing, and then sudden breakthroughs where something shifts dramatically. If you are measuring your progress every few days and comparing yourself to where you were last week, you will often feel discouraged because the changes are happening below the surface in the slow, deep work of neural consolidation, and they are not always immediately visible. Measure your progress monthly, not weekly, and measure it in terms of comfort and automaticity, not just accuracy. Can you speak for longer without pausing? Does the language feel more natural than it did last month? Are there phrases and patterns that now come out automatically that used to require effort? Those are the real signs of progress. And on that timescale, if you are using the method consistently, you will see them. Mistake 4, treating sleep as passive. This is perhaps the most important mistake to avoid. The sleep phase of the method is not passive. It requires active preparation. The quality of what your brain does during sleep is directly determined by the quality and intention of what you did in the waking hours before it. If you skip the pre-sleep ritual, if you stay up too late on your phone, watch stimulating content in your native language, fall asleep mid-sentence in a text conversation, you lose the sleep phase entirely. The brain still consolidates, but it consolidates whatever happened to be in it at the end of the day, which may have very little to do with English. The pre-sleep ritual is not optional. It is the hinge between your waking work and your sleeping work. Without it, the system does not function. Mistake 5, being inconsistent. Language acquisition requires consistent daily exposure over an extended period of time. A few weeks of intense effort followed by a break followed by a restart does not work. The gains evaporate during the break. The habits have to be rebuilt. And every restart means starting the emotional rebuilding process partially from scratch. Consistency does not mean perfection. Missing 1 day is fine, missing 2 days is fine, missing a week occasionally, for life reasons, is fine, but the overall pattern must be one of daily engagement with the language. Not every day needs to be a full protocol day. Some days your comprehensible input is 30 minutes in the car. Some days your speaking practice is 5 minutes in the kitchen. Some days your story bath is replaced by falling asleep to a gentle English podcast. That is fine. Any contact is better than no contact. The key is not to let days of no contact accumulate into weeks. Mistake 6, comparing yourself to others. Every learner's path is different. The factors that determine the pace of acquisition, your native language, your age of first exposure to English, the amount of prior study you have done, your level of daily life stress, your natural affinity for languages, the amount of time you can dedicate to practice, are all different for every person. Some learners will move through the milestones of the 30-day plan quickly and explosively. Others will move more slowly. Neither is better or worse. Neither says anything about your intelligence, your worth, or your ultimate potential. The only comparison that matters is between you and your past self. Are you more comfortable with English than you were last month? Are you more fluent than you were 6 months ago? Is the language feeling more available, more natural, more yours? That is the comparison that tells you what you need to know. 13, the identity shift, becoming an English speaker. I want to take a few minutes to talk about something that goes beyond technique, something that I have observed in every single learner who has reached true fluency in a second language. Every one of them went through an identity shift. There came a point in their journey where they stopped thinking of themselves as someone learning English and started thinking of themselves as an English speaker. It sounds subtle, it is not. It is one of the most profound transformations a person can go through in the language learning process. Because language is not just a communication tool. Language is identity. The language you speak shapes how you think. It shapes what emotions are available to you, what concepts you can easily access, what relationships you can form. People who speak multiple languages often describe having slightly different personalities in each language, not because their core self changes, but because each language gives them access to a different emotional and cultural register. Becoming an English speaker is not just adding a skill, it is expanding who you are. It is gaining access to a vast global community of minds, experiences, ideas, and stories. It is giving yourself the ability to participate fully in the most widely shared conversation currently happening on Earth. When you begin to feel this, when English begins to feel like yours, like a part of your identity rather than a subject you are studying, your relationship with the language transforms. And with that transformation comes a natural motivation that no external reward can replicate. You are not learning English to pass a test. You are not learning English to get a promotion. You are speaking English because that is who you are. The method we have discussed, the waking protocol, the pre-sleep ritual, the sleep reinforcement, the morning activation, is not just a language learning system. It is a personal transformation system. It is a way of reorganizing your brain, your habits, your emotional responses, and ultimately your identity around a new language. And it works, not because it is magic, but because it works with the brain, not against it, because it treats language as what it truly is, a deep, embodied, emotional, social, and cognitive skill, and it builds fluency accordingly. You are capable of this, not eventually, not in theory, but actually. The brain you have right now, at whatever age you are reading or listening to this, is capable of building deep English fluency. The research is clear on this. Adults can and do become fluent in second languages. It takes longer than childhood acquisition. It requires different strategies, but it is absolutely within your reach. The question is not whether you can. The question is whether you are willing to do things differently, to stop studying English and start living it, to stop trying to learn the language and start letting the language learn you. 14, building your lifetime English practice. One of the beautiful things about the method we have discussed today is that it does not have a finish line. It does not end when you reach a certain level or pass a certain test. It is a lifetime practice, and as your English deepens, the practice becomes richer, more enjoyable, and more effortlessly woven into your life. Let me describe what your English practice might look like 2 years from now if you commit to this system. You wake up in the morning and your first thought is in English. Not because you are trying, because it has become natural. Your morning activation practice has become a genuine pleasure, a time to think creatively and expressively in a language that now feels fully yours. During your day, you listen to English content not because you should, but because you want to. The podcasts and audiobooks and shows you follow are genuinely interesting to you. English has become a source of entertainment and education, not just study. You look forward to your English time in the same way you look forward to your favorite meal or your favorite activity. When you speak English, in meetings, in conversations, in presentations, online, you do not experience the freezing, the searching, the translation lag that used to characterize your English. Words come, phrases arrive, the language moves through you rather than stopping at you. You still make mistakes. All speakers, native and non-native, make mistakes. But mistakes no longer feel like failures. They feel like data, information about where the language is still growing in you, and you meet them with curiosity rather than shame. Before sleep, your ritual has become one of the most peaceful parts of your day. You lie down with your audiobook or your podcast, let the English wash over you, and drift into sleep feeling satisfied with the day's language. Your brain does its nightly work and you trust it to do so. This is not a fantasy. This is what happens when a learner commits to the method and gives it time. The timeline varies. Some learners experience this kind of transformation in 18 months. For others, it takes 3 years. But the direction is always the same and the destination is always reachable. I want to close this section with something that I tell every learner I work with, and that I want you to carry with you. Fluency is not a destination, it is a direction. You do not arrive at fluency one day and stop, you keep going. The language keeps deepening, the subtleties keep revealing themselves, the richness keeps expanding. A lifelong learner of a language never stops learning it, not because they never get good enough, but because the language is alive and growing and inexhaustible. The greatest speakers of English, native and non-native alike, will tell you that the language is never finished. There is always more to discover, more precision to achieve, more beauty to find, more ways to say the unsayable. This is not discouraging. It is one of the most exciting things about language. The journey does not end, and the further you go, the more beautiful it becomes. 15. A final word from Maya. We have covered a great deal of ground together today. Let me bring it all together one last time before I leave you. The speaking momentum is real. It is not a metaphor. It is a neurological phenomenon. Once the process of language acquisition is properly set in motion, once the daily input, the emotional anchoring, the speaking practice, the pre-sleep ritual, and the sleep reinforcement are all working together, a genuine momentum builds. And that momentum, like a river finding its natural course, becomes self-sustaining. You do not need to push it every single day. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to understand everything or remember everything or speak without mistakes. You need to show up. Every day, in some form, you show up for your English. You listen, you speak, you let the language into your life. You prepare your brain for its nightly work. And you trust the process. The brain you have is extraordinary. It built fluency in your native language from nothing, from pure exposure, from the need to communicate, from the deep human hunger to connect. It can do the same for English. It is designed to do exactly this. And when you align your waking life and your sleeping life with that process, you are working with one of the most powerful learning systems in the known universe, your own brain. I want you to start today, not tomorrow, not on Monday, not after you finish one more grammar book or pass one more test. Today, pick your first piece of English content to listen to, something genuinely interesting. Listen for 30 minutes with full engagement. Collect one pattern that you want to make your own. Say it out loud 3 times. Narrate some part of your day in English, even if only for 5 minutes. And tonight, before sleep, listen to something warm and calm in English for 20 minutes, then drift off softly with English whispering in the background. That is the first step. And the first step taken today begins everything. I am Maya. This is the Speaking Momentum, and I will see you in the language. Thank you for listening. Before we close completely, I want to address some of the questions I receive most often from learners who are beginning this practice. These are honest questions that deserve honest answers, and they will help you get the most out of the method. Question: how long before I start to notice a difference? This is the most common question I receive, and the answer is honest but perhaps surprising. The first changes you will notice are not about ability, they are about feeling. Within the first 2 weeks of the practice, most learners notice that English feels slightly less foreign. The sounds feel more familiar, the rhythm feels more comfortable, certain words and phrases feel more available. The anxiety around English speaking decreases slightly. These shifts precede any dramatic change in speaking ability, and they are actually the most important early signs that the process is working. The neurological changes are happening below the surface. Trust them. In terms of speaking ability, most learners who commit fully to the practice notice a meaningful, perceptible shift within 60 to 90 days. Not from beginner to fluent, but from effortful to more natural. From translated to more direct, from frozen to more flowing. The 60 to 90-day mark is when the consolidated patterns begin to emerge in production. True conversational fluency, the ability to sustain a natural, spontaneous conversation in English without significant effort, typically takes between 12 and 24 months of consistent, intensive practice using this method. That may sound long, but most learners who have been studying English for years without this approach are further from fluency after 10 years than someone who has been using this method for 1 year. Quality of practice matters infinitely more than quantity of years. Question: what if I can only do 30 minutes of practice a day? 30 minutes a day is enough to make progress, but it requires that those 30 minutes be used with maximum intention and quality. Here is how I would allocate 30 minutes of practice. 10 minutes in the morning for your activation, 5 minutes of trying to think and speak in English as you wake up, 5 minutes of listening to content from the night before, 15 minutes at some point during the day for comprehensible input. Engaged, focused listening to something genuinely interesting. 5 minutes in the evening for the beginning of your pre-sleep ritual, reviewing a few patterns, setting your intention for sleep. This will not produce the fastest possible progress, but it will produce steady, real progress. And steady progress maintained consistently over a year is worth far more than sporadic, intense bursts followed by long absences. Question: I have been studying English for many years but still cannot speak fluently. Is it too late to change my approach? No, it is never too late. And in fact, adult learners who switch to this approach after years of traditional study often make dramatic progress very quickly. This is because they already have a substantial foundation of explicit knowledge, grammar rules, vocabulary, reading comprehension, which can now be converted into implicit automatic language through the right kind of practice. What they need is not more knowledge. They need the transformation of the knowledge they already have from conscious to automatic. And that transformation is exactly what this method is designed to produce. The comprehensible input builds and deepens the patterns. The speaking practice gives those patterns physical expression, the sleep reinforcement drives them into automatic storage, and the emotional work removes the fear that has been blocking access to them. If you have been studying for years and feel stuck, this method is especially relevant for you. You are closer to fluency than you think. You just need to stop adding more knowledge and start converting what you already have. Question: is it really possible to learn while I'm asleep? Let me be precise about this because it is important. You do not learn new material while you sleep. You cannot play a list of new vocabulary words while you are fast asleep and wake up having acquired them. That kind of learning does not happen during deep sleep phases. What does happen during sleep, powerfully and crucially, is the consolidation and deepening of material you encountered while awake. Your brain strengthens what it already has. It organizes patterns. It moves information from fragile short-term storage to robust long-term storage. It integrates new language patterns with existing ones, and the soft presence of familiar English audio during the early and lighter phases of sleep can support and guide that natural consolidation process. Not by introducing new material, but by keeping the focus of the brain's nightly work on English rather than on whatever else occupied your waking mind. So, you do not acquire new language in your sleep, but you do deepen and consolidate the language you worked on during the day. And that deepening is so significant, so measurable, and so important to fluency development that it changes the entire architecture of how quickly you can progress. Question: what kind of audio is best for the sleep phase? The single most important quality of sleep phase audio is familiarity. It must be content you have already heard and understood. Your brain cannot process genuinely new material during the consolidation phases of sleep in a way that produces acquisition. It can only reinforce what it already has. Beyond that, the ideal qualities are a warm, clear, unhurried voice, a narrative or storytelling structure, calm, non-stimulating emotional content, and natural, standard spoken English, not overly fast, not heavily accented to the point of difficulty, not filled with jargon or technical language. Good choices include literary audiobooks read by skilled narrators, well-produced podcast episodes with clear narration, documentary-style recordings, memoir and personal essay audio, and carefully selected English language teaching podcasts that are content-rich rather than grammar-focused. Poor choices include news broadcasts with urgent or stressful content, fast-paced conversational podcasts with multiple speakers talking over each other, audio with frequent music interruptions, content with sudden loud sounds, and anything that makes you feel alert or anxious rather than relaxed. Question: should I use subtitles when watching English video content? This is a question that language learners debate enthusiastically, and I want to give you a nuanced answer. For beginners and intermediate learners, subtitles in English not in your native language are a valuable support. They allow you to follow content that might otherwise be too fast or unclear without removing the English experience and replacing it with your native language. English subtitles train your eye and ear together, which is genuinely useful. However, the goal over time is to move away from subtitle dependency. When you always have subtitles available, your brain learns to lean on them, rather than training the ear to recognize spoken English directly. And the ability to understand natural, fast, connected speech, real spoken English as it actually sounds, with its reductions and elisions and rhythms, is a skill that only develops through practice. My recommendation, use English subtitles when you need them to understand and enjoy content, but regularly challenge yourself with content where you turn the subtitles off and rely only on your ears. The discomfort of that challenge is exactly where the listening skill develops. Start with short clips, highly familiar content, and slowly work toward longer and less familiar material without subtitles. Your comprehension will grow, and with it, your confidence in real-world English situations. Question: can I use music in English as part of my comprehensible input? Music can be a wonderful part of your English emotional anchoring practice. Songs in English create powerful emotional associations with the language, and lyrics, when you take the time to understand them, can expose you to beautiful and interesting uses of English that are very different from conversational or written language. However, music alone is not a substitute for comprehensible input in the acquisition sense. The reason is that song lyrics are processed differently in the brain from ordinary speech. The melody and rhythm carry so much of the meaning that the linguistic patterns are not processed in the same way as narrative or conversational language. Use music for emotional anchoring. Use it to make English joyful and pleasurable. Use it to ground yourself in the sounds and rhythms of the language. But pair it with spoken content, podcasts, audiobooks, conversations, that provides the genuine comprehensible input your brain needs for deep acquisition. These are some of the questions that come up most often. If you have others, keep them in mind as you move through your practice. Often the best answers come not from being told, but from discovering what works for your own brain, your own learning style, and your own life. That discovery is itself part of the journey, and every step of the journey is worth taking. 16, the power of listening deeply. I want to take a moment to talk about listening. Real listening, not the kind of listening where you have English playing in the background while your mind is somewhere else. The kind of listening where you are fully present, fully inside the language, fully alive to every sound and word and pause and rhythm. Most language learners dramatically underestimate the role of listening in fluency development. They think of speaking as the goal and listening as a preparatory activity. In reality, speaking and listening are so deeply intertwined that you cannot separate them. Every great speaker is, first and foremost, a great listener, and every great language learner builds their fluency on a bedrock of deep, immersive, emotionally engaged listening. Here is why listening is so fundamental to fluency. When you listen to natural English, your brain is doing something extraordinary. It is not just decoding words. It is absorbing the entire system of the language, the rhythms, the intonation patterns, the way words connect and reduce in natural speech, the pauses and emphases that carry meaning, the emotional texture of how English sounds when it is alive and being used by a real person to express real feeling. This level of absorption cannot happen through reading. It cannot happen through grammar study. It can only happen through listening, lots of it, deeply, over time. Think about how a child learns language. Before a child produces a single word, they have been listening to language for months. They have been soaking in the sounds, patterns, and rhythms of their native tongue. By the time they speak their first word, they already have thousands of hours of listening behind them. That listening is not wasted time before the real learning begins. That listening is the real learning. The speaking that comes later is the expression of all that absorbed listening. As an adult learner, you are trying to compress that process. You cannot spend years listening before you speak, but you can understand what that listening is doing and do as much of it as possible, as richly and as deeply as possible. What does deep listening look like in practice? It means choosing content that holds your full attention and giving it that full attention. It means listening to the same content multiple times, not because you have to, but because each time you listen, you hear something you did not hear before. A new phrase, a new rhythm, a new subtlety of expression. This is not repetition for memorization. This is the gradual revelation of depth that is already there in the language. It means listening with your whole body, sitting comfortably, closing your eyes if that helps, letting the sounds of the language move through you physically, noticing how English vowels feel different in your mouth from your native language vowels. Noticing the rhythm of English sentences, the stress on content words, the light, fast movement through function words. Noticing the melody of English, the way the voice rises and falls to signal meaning and emotion. And it means listening emotionally, letting yourself feel what the speaker is expressing, letting the story or the idea or the argument land in you the way it is intended to land. This emotional engagement is not just about enjoying the content. It is about building the emotional scaffolding on which language acquisition hangs. I recommend that every learner have what I call a listening hero, a specific English speaker whose voice and way of expressing themselves they find particularly beautiful, compelling, or interesting. This is a speaker you listen to deeply and repeatedly, a broadcaster, a podcaster, an author who reads their own audiobooks, a storyteller, someone whose English you genuinely admire and want to absorb. When you listen to your listening hero, you are not just consuming content, you are apprenticing in a style of English expression. You are letting their rhythms and patterns seep into you. And over time, subtle elements of their style, the phrases they favor, the structures they use, the emotional quality of their delivery, will begin to appear in your own English, not as imitation, but as inspiration, as material that has been absorbed and remade into something that is genuinely yours. Deep listening is one of the most powerful and most underused tools in the language learner's arsenal. Use it every day. It will change your English in ways that no amount of grammar study ever could. 17. Accent, rhythm, and the music of English. There is a conversation that almost every language learner has with themselves at some point in their journey. It is the conversation about accent. Should I try to sound like a native speaker? Is my accent preventing people from understanding me? Will my accent always mark me as a foreigner? Should I change the way I speak? I want to address this conversation honestly because the anxiety around accent is one of the most common sources of inhibition and self-consciousness for language learners, and it deserves a clear, thoughtful answer. Here is the truth about accent. Every speaker of every language has an accent. Native speakers of American English have accents. Native speakers of British English have accents. Native speakers of Australian English have accents. The idea of accentless English is a myth. There is no neutral, unmarked English pronunciation that belongs to no one. Every accent belongs to someone, to a place, a culture, a history. Your accent in English is not a mistake. It is the trace of where you came from. It is part of who you are. And unless it is preventing people from understanding you, which in most cases it is not something that needs to be fixed. What does matter enormously is intelligibility and rhythm. Can people understand what you are saying? Does your speech have the rhythmic patterns of English that allow listeners to process it easily? English has a very specific rhythmic pattern that is different from most other languages. Linguists call it a stress-timed language. This means that in English, the stressed syllables, the content words, the words carrying the important information, occur at roughly regular intervals, and the unstressed syllables, the little connecting words and function words, are squeezed in between them quickly and lightly. This rhythm is fundamental to how English sounds, and learners who have not internalized this rhythm often sound difficult to understand, not because of their vowels or consonants, but because the rhythm is wrong. The unstressed words are given too much weight. The stressed words do not stand out. The whole sentence falls flat. Learning to hear and reproduce the rhythm of English is one of the most important steps towards sounding natural and being easily understood. And the way to learn it is exactly what we have been talking about throughout this session. Deep, engaged, listening to natural English over a long period of time. When you listen to English deeply, repeatedly, and with attention to sound as well as meaning, the rhythm begins to enter you. You start to feel when a sentence sounds right and when it sounds off. You develop what musicians call an ear, an internalized sense of what the language sounds like when it is flowing naturally. And that ear begins to influence your speaking, not through conscious effort to do the rhythm right, but through the gradual absorption of the pattern into your body's language-producing system. The same way a musician who listens to thousands of hours of a particular style of music begins to play with the rhythms and phrasings of that style without thinking about it. Let me give you a practical approach to working on the rhythm of English. I call it shadow listening. This is a technique where you listen to a piece of spoken English and simultaneously whisper or mouth what you hear, keeping pace with the speaker. You are not repeating after a pause. You are speaking at the same time, shadowing the speaker's voice as closely as you can. Shadow listening is uncomfortable at first because the speaker is always slightly ahead of you and you are always slightly catching up. But that slight discomfort is the practice. It forces your speech system to move at the speed and rhythm of natural English rather than at the translated, considered pace of studied English. Do shadow listening for 10 to 15 minutes a day with content that is just slightly above your comfortable speaking pace. And over weeks and months, you will notice your natural speaking pace increasing, your rhythm becoming more natural, your speech taking on more of the flow and music of English. The music of English is real. It is not just decoration, it is meaning, it is social connection. It is the signal that tells listeners, I am comfortable in this language, I belong here. Listen to me with ease. And when your English has that music, when the rhythm and flow and melody are right, people stop noticing your accent and start hearing your message. That is the goal, not to sound like someone you are not, but to make your English so naturally rhythmic and flowing that it carries your message and your personality to the world with full clarity and full presence. 18, when progress feels slow, the plateau and the breakthrough. There will come a time in your English learning journey, probably more than once, when progress feels like it has stopped. When you have been doing everything right, showing up every day, putting in the hours, and yet the language does not seem to be getting any better. The plateau. Every learner hits the plateau, and for many learners, the plateau is where they give up, because the plateau feels like evidence that the method is not working, that they have reached their limit, that further progress is impossible. I want to tell you with complete honesty that the plateau is not what it feels like, and understanding what is actually happening during a plateau will change the way you experience it and whether you push through it or give up. Here is what a language learning plateau actually is. It is a period of invisible consolidation. When you are actively improving, when your skills are visibly developing, when your conversations are noticeably getting better, when you can hear yourself progressing, your brain is in an active acquisition phase. New patterns are being formed, new connections are being made. Progress is tangible, but growth cannot be continuous and visible forever. The brain needs periods of integration, times when it is not adding new material as quickly, but rather organizing and deepening what it already has, strengthening connections, refining patterns, moving material from I can use this with effort to I use this automatically. This integration work is happening constantly at every level of your practice, but sometimes it requires a full, extended period where visible surface level progress slows while the deeper consolidation happens. During a plateau, you feel stuck, but your brain is not stuck. Your brain is doing some of its most important work. It is embedding the gains you have made so deeply that they will never be lost. It is building the infrastructure for the next level of progress. And when the plateau ends, and it always ends, the breakthrough that follows is typically dramatic and disproportionate. Suddenly things that were effortful become automatic. Suddenly conversations flow in a way they never did before. Suddenly you can understand native speakers at full speed without struggle. This is not magic, it is the payoff for the invisible consolidation that happened during the plateau. Knowing this does not make the plateau comfortable. It is still frustrating to feel like you are not making progress despite your effort, but it changes your relationship with it. Instead of the plateau being a sign to stop, it becomes a sign to continue. Your job during a plateau is not to do more or try harder. Your job is to maintain the practice. Keep the input going. Keep the speaking practice going. Keep the pre-sleep ritual going. Trust the process. Let the invisible consolidation happen. There is one thing that genuinely helps during a plateau, and I want to share it with you. Vary your content. If you have been listening to the same type of English content for a long time, the same genre, the same register, the same topics, introduce something new, a different type of show, a different podcast genre, a different style of English speaker. New content creates new stimulation, new patterns, new neural connections. And often the introduction of variety is exactly what breaks a plateau and triggers a new wave of visible progress. The plateau is not the enemy. It is part of the journey. Welcome it as a sign that your brain is doing its deepest work, and keep going. I also want to talk about something related to the plateau, which is the experience of regression. The feeling that you are not just failing to progress, but actually getting worse. Learners sometimes experience periods where their English seems to deteriorate. Conversations that used to flow feel labored. Words that were automatic feel elusive. This is alarming when it happens. But it is also normal, and it usually means something specific. It typically means that your brain is in the process of restructuring. You have been using one set of patterns and strategies, and your brain is now trying to upgrade to more complex, more accurate ones. During the upgrade, the old system is destabilized before the new one is fully established. It feels like regression. It is actually the growing pains of a higher level of competence. Think of it like remodeling a house. For a period during the renovation, the house is less functional than it was before. Walls are missing, dust is everywhere, getting from room to room is harder than before. But the end result, when the renovation is complete, is a much better house. Trust the renovation, trust the restructuring, keep your practice steady, maintain your calm, and the new, higher level of function will emerge. Appendix: Daily Practice Checklist. Here is a simple daily checklist you can use to track your practice. Not every item needs to be completed every day, particularly on very busy days, but aim to complete every item on as many days as possible. Morning activation. First thing in the morning, 5 minutes of thinking or speaking in English. Try to describe how you feel, what you are noticing, what you are planning. Morning replay, 10 minutes listening to or reading a short section of content you encountered the night before. Morning expression, 10 minutes speaking English out loud about anything. Tell a story, express an opinion, narrate your plans for the day. Daily comprehensible input, minimum 30 minutes, ideal is 90 minutes to 2 hours. Engaged, focused listening to English content you find genuinely interesting. Pattern collection. 3 to 5 language patterns, phrases, or expressions noticed during your comprehensible input, written down and said aloud. Daily narration, at least 10 minutes narrating your day or thoughts in English out loud or internally, during commuting, exercising, cooking, or any activity. Pre-sleep review, 20 minutes before bed, reviewing your collected patterns, reading through them slowly, saying them softly. Story bath, 25 minutes of relaxed listening to narrative English content. Sleep audio setup. Before lying down, setting up soft, familiar English audio at very low volume. Intention setting, 5 to 15 minutes of gentle English thought or speech as you drift toward sleep. This is the complete daily practice. In its fullest form, it occupies approximately 2 to 3 hours of your day, but much of that time is embedded in activities you are already doing. The listening happens during commuting and cooking. The narration happens while moving through your day. The pre-sleep ritual replaces time that might otherwise be spent on a phone or television. What requires additional dedicated time is the morning activation and expression, perhaps 30 minutes total, and the story bath before sleep. These are the non-negotiables. If you can only do 2 things from this list on any given day, make it those 2. The daily practice is the engine. Sleep is the amplifier. And the English identity you are building is the destination that makes every moment of practice meaningful. Welcome to the speaking momentum. Your fluency is waiting.